Thank you, Kate, and thank you for the great opportunity to speak here today at this conference in this splendid venue. Germany, I think, qualifies as a key player on this scene. I mean, they have been at least central to many of the debates and discussions that are surrounding the current crisis and the great shifts that we are talking about in European security. And not least, they have produced their own hashtag, Zeitenwende turnaround, which is all over the place. And the reason why there's so much discussion about the German shift or reevaluation of their policy is, of course, that in the matter of just a few days around the 24th of February, Germany reversed long-standing policies, quite a number of them. I just mentioned them very shortly. They agreed to join its allies and partners on sanctions, quite heavy sanctions, including suspension of the controversial Nord Stream 2 pipeline. They upended they gave up their reluctance against sending weapons into a war zone. And perhaps most surprisingly, they finally, some would say, agreed or decided to invest heavily in their defense spending, so heavily that few have expected this dimension, a special fund of 100 billion euro, mainly fought to fill long-standing gaps, and the decision to spend more than 2% of GDP on defense in the coming years, a move that would catapult them to a third place in global rankings behind US and China, surpassing European allies UK and France, if followed through, of course. Now, these changes, these bold changes, you would say, come with a big however. Firstly, of course, because, as most of you know, they have come about under immense pressure from the situation, from a war breaking out and forcing them to act, but also under immense pressure from allies and partners who thought Germany was too hesitant for a long time. And then, although widely applauded, these changes almost immediately turned into criticism and doubts. Doubts about Germany actually following through as promised, and criticism about being too late, too cautious, too hesitant. Now, some of this criticism, and we will certainly hear from our French colleague afterwards, have been directed at the Franco-German couple together. The two of them have been accused of being too hesitant with regard to weapon deliveries. They have been attacked for maintaining a line of communication with Russia. They have been accused of considering obtaining a ceasefire before the war had proceeded further. And not least, they're also accused of delaying Ukraine's ambitions for becoming a member of the EU. Now, this raises a lot of questions, and I have to be frank, many of us who observe Germany and German politics closely day by day are puzzled. We don't have the answers, and apparently neither do politicians in Germany understand what's going on in their own country, and this only shows you how little allies and partners can understand. So one question is, of course, is all this criticism that is cast quite violently against Germany right now justified? I would say only partly. It is absolutely because all this hesitance, this ambiguity might have several structural reasons, and it might be the cause of very, very bad communication, especially on behalf of the Chancellor. But as a whole, it creates an uncertainty about a key ally that is simply not good and should be revised as quickly as possible. But in my view, there is no basis or no real basis to criticize Germany on two things, and this is the general support of Ukraine and the genuine ambition to reverse decades of Russia policy. And the second thing is, I think there's no real basis to question Germany's commitment to collective defense and to NATO. If you read almost every statement that has been made by the Chancellor, by other members of the government since February 24th, Almost every time the government underlines its willingness to step up its commitment to the alliance, to defend each square meter of the alliance. And this rhetoric has also been backed up by actually reinforcing Germany's presence at the eastern flank, and for us, importantly, here in the north, also in the Baltic Sea, quite substantially. Another big question is what we then can expect from Germany in the future. Will they turn, when these discussions proceed, turn into a different ally, a bolder ally, a more reliable ally? I think it's important to look at all the fields in which Germany is playing. It's the EU, of course, it's NATO, it's the G7. So Germany has both a regional European role. It sees itself also, at least as a political and economic player, as a global player. And it also has to look inside. It sees itself as an anchor of stability in Europe. It needs to produce stability in Germany. It needs to make sure that all these projects, all these crises have to be handled without taking up too much debt. And this is a big question, how to finance all this without taking over. So the sum of all these considerations apparently pose a quite heavy burden on German decision makers, which you would then say paralyze them in face with the current crisis. So the third question I want to mention is the one we debate on this panel, which is central to all these questions of this conference, is how will the war and the changes that it set into motion impact on Euro-Atlantic security architecture, meaning how can European and American allies together guarantee security and stability? Where do they have to cooperate, and where do they have to find a meaningful division of labor in the future? Here's where there are huge challenges ahead, which Germany has to address, together with France, most of them. And this is, of course, reforming the EU, implementing the strategic the compass that has been talked about, and, of course, also deal with the prospect of enlargements, not only the Ukraine, but also the countries of the Western Balkans knocking at Europe's door. So, will Germany show, together with France, the leadership needed to address all these challenges? Especially among the critics of Germany and France, we are seeing a debate now about leadership in Europe that suggests that others, perhaps the Central and Eastern European countries, together with the UK and the US, should take the lead, because apparently France and Germany cannot do this. I think these debates, in a way, reflect the new diversity we're seeing in European security, which Germany and France have to address and which they need to take serious. At the same time, it still matters, of course, what the big countries think and what they do, how they cooperate. So I think this debate about leadership in Europe actually is misleading. Interesting, of course, an interesting element, and I spent the last minutes on this, perhaps, is how Germany will reorient. What we have seen, and which has been a quite remarkable feature of this crisis, was the close coordination with the US, which is largely due to a very, very constructive approach on behalf of the Biden administration, which has worked very, very well for Germany. They really invited them into a dialogue, and this made things much, much more easier for a chancellor like Scholz to actually act more. At the same time, Germany, of course, all the time has to and does look to France, look to its main partner. And I recommend you all to watch or hear or read the press conference of 9th May between Macron and Bundeskanzler Scholz, where it's really a back and forth on mentioning we are still our best friends, we still need together bring Europe forward, at the same time making clear we are NATO, we are doing this for NATO, the US is really our most important partner. And if you want to more concrete proof, it's Germany's decision to actually buy now American F-35 fighter jets, while at the same time in the Scholz speech of 27 February and in subsequent documents always insisting this doesn't mean we're giving up on our joint defense investments together with France. So to conclude, right now we are witnessing almost daily evaluations of Germany's performance and growing frustration among many observers about the lack of a clear line, a strategy, and as we have learned, not easy to interpret these statements of the Chancellor and to square them with perhaps much bolder statements by the foreign minister or even by his own parliamentary group. And now we might learn more about all this when Germany in the coming weeks or months presents its first ever national security strategy, and a China strategy has been promised. But I think we shouldn't expect too much of it, because please remember that this is still a very young government. In this constellation, it is quite inexperienced. It has embarked on this duty with a very, very ambitious agenda, like all other countries. It is now faced with a war it has to deal with. And to end on a positive note, this government still holds together. And political stability in these times is also some important capital. Thank you.